Hello, folks. I still have a little bit of a sore throat, a little congestion, but I guess I'm still in good shape to give the presentation. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the weather, maybe it's my age, getting too old for this. Um, I asked my son to take the day off today, and it's not often, he's the boss, and so it's not often you get a chance to tell the boss to take a hike. And that's because the presentation today is probably going to fill most of the hour. But even if you have questions, please put them in the YouTube comments section, okay? And let me get that up there to make sure that I see your questions in case you do happen to have questions. Okay, so I can see your questions. Anyways, the subject today is a little bit disturbing. It's disturbing because what I'm going to show you today is that religious people, mystics, spiritualists have taken over science, over physics. It's not that science has separated itself from religion over the centuries. It's that we ended up where we started, using uh, using what is it? Invoking gods, spirits, using all kinds of what's the word I'm looking for? Um, Supernatural. Really, in this case, it's irrational explanations to cover their ignorance. In the old days, they invoked spirits and gods. Well, today we invoke four-dimensional space-time, zero-dimensional black holes, heavy dark matter, invisible dark matter, and particles of mass, all kinds of things that have been invoked and that are being invoked today to explain, quotation marks there, to explain how our universe runs. And I think I'll show today, what I'm presenting, that has taken us back to the days of old, to traditional religions. There is no difference. And I think you'll see it also because the person's going to do the talking for me, essentially. The individual here in question, she argues that that quantum mechanics proves God, proves the existence of God. And I kind of agree with her to some degree. Uh, Quantum mechanics really is a mystical theory, and it tends to show that not so much that we don't understand, which it does as well, but it shows that quantum is a religion. And the fact that quantum does not recognize God, or mathematical physics in general tries to get away from God, this lady argues essentially the opposite, and I think she's right. It's not that science has departed from religion, but science has been taken over, has been conquered by religion. And the people who do science today are spiritualists. They are mystics. They are people who explain with supernatural, I call it irrational explanation. Supernatural, I always distinguish from irrational. Supernatural, you can imagine God. Bearded guy, right, with a magic wand, we can imagine God. Four-dimensional space-time, we cannot even imagine it, and they tell you that. So obviously, we're not talking about supernatural, the fact that we have angels and spirits going around. We're talking about something that's totally unimaginable. Four-dimensional space-time, 1D strings, particles of mass, and a lot of other concepts, bending of time, and that kind of thing. And so, I want to distinguish irrational from supernatural. What this lady says is that because quantum is irrational, right, she's going to use the fact that it's irrational, or her interpretation of it at least, is that it proves God. And she mentions the Quran. She's Islamic, okay? And let me get down to her once and for all here. Her name is Sabrine Said. And she has a website. She is putting up YouTube videos. And in most of these videos, she's trying to show that the Quran, the holy book of Islam, already, foretold or predicted quantum mechanics and all the stuff that quantum mechanics just discovered 100 years ago. The Quran already, 1,500 years ago, over 1,000 years ago, already discovered it, and it's in the book. You just got to read the good book, and you'll be up to par. So quantum mechanics, science in general, physics, with quotation, mathematical physics, hasn't discovered anything. It's already been said in the Quran. And by the way, she's not the only one that does this. If you look around, you'll find people who use the Bible and other books, holy books, traditional holy books, to make their case that science has only proven God. So she's not the only one. Well, anyways, I'm going to take her point of view today, and that's from Islam's point of view. And one thing I want to make a point of is that she is not, just an ordinary individual out there who just has an opinion. She's a mechanical engineer from India, and she's obviously studied some quantum mechanics. And now she's using it to prove God. The irony of it all. Okay, so let's get on with it. She starts her dissertation by saying 1/3 of our economy runs on quantum mechanics. And she's referring primarily to all the electronics. Essentially, she's got an argument that so many other people raise that, quantum computers wouldn't run if quantum were wrong. Quotation there, right? If it were wrong. And the only reason that they run is because, quantum is right. And again, the issue here is that people have this idea that technology proves quantum mechanics. And what we're actually saying is that technology proves a theory, the explanation, the physical interpretation for a phenomenon. And so we got a little bit of a problem there because, the question is whether proof has anything to do with science. That's one issue that's going to be out there. So keep that one in mind as we go along. She says this theory is such that it doesn't even have a competitor. Well, she's obviously not aware of the rope model of light. So yeah, if you eliminate all competitors, then you don't have a competitor. If you censor them, then obviously you won't have a competitor. When it comes to be verified both experimentally with observations and the mathematics works, she says. So she says that it's been proven from every angle. The mathematics works. It's been verified through experiment, etc., and observation. And she's going to, number 3 here, that's her introduction, she's going to prove with quantum mechanics today the existence of God. Straightforward? So let's get on with the show here. She continues on saying that quantum, let's get this up here. She says, quantum physics says there is no physical objective reality out there. Okay, now this is so-called science. Quantum mechanics is considered part of mathematical physics, which is considered maybe the most important branch of science. And she says that quantum mechanics says there's no physical reality out there. And she's right. That's what quantum says. There is no physical reality. She's just making it plain for those who, have doubts. And she said quantum mechanics brought consciousness into the realm of physics. And so again, the question is whether consciousness has anything to do with physics. But what her point is that, when you bring the observer in there, and you say, well, the observer takes some measurement and observes. She says that's an important part of science. That's an important part of physics. And so yes, it's got to be a conscious observer. So we're introducing consciousness into physics. And just keep in mind that other point. One is, whether we prove anything, and especially through experiment, whether we prove theories through experiment. And the other issue is whether consciousness, in other words, belongs in physics, or whether consciousness is something that has to do more with philosophy. Because by introducing consciousness, by introducing the observer, you're introducing subjectivity. And the question here that you got to keep in mind throughout this presentation is whether subjectivity, observer, measurement, testimony, witnesses, whether those have anything to do with physics, or whether physics should be totally objective in the sense that irrespective of the observer, there should be a reality out there. And these people are saying that there isn't, that it's the observer that determines the reality. And you'll see this as we go along here. Okay. So as a witness to what she's going to argue, her presentation, her discourse, she introduces Mr. Michio Kaku. And what we're going to find out about Mr. Kaku is that he is really a mystic. He doesn't belong in physics. He's not even a scientist. He's a guy who believes, again, because of his indoctrination in college, that reality is determined by observation, and that we have no way of knowing certain things out there because quantum is a probabilistic theory, and therefore there is nothing you can pin down exactly. It's just in the hands of God. It's like, you can't predict anything really with quantum, and because of that, it's not deterministic. It's like it's not really, you could even say that it's not part of science, because science is objective and deterministic, or that you should be able to predict, if that's your notion of science. Then here quantum is saying, no, you can't do any of that, because we don't have a handle on what quantum does. We cannot really explain it. Or like Mr. Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize 1965, said, no one understands quantum mechanics. But he says the most successful physical theory of all time is called quantum mechanics. It's based on the idea of probabilities, that you don't really know where an electron is. An electron can exist in multiple states at the same time. In other words, and this is famous in quantum mechanics, that a particle can be at two places at the same time. They got that really from the slit experiment. They say the particle really is at the two slits at the same time. And if you block one of the slits, or if you try to find out if the particle went through that slit with some kind of detector, well, you're interfering with the equipment. Even if you do it from far away, you're interfering with the trajectory of the photon, and therefore there is no interference pattern. So it's like Mother Nature's tricking you, saying, if you want to find out whether the particle, whether it's an electron or a photon, went through this slit, I'm not going to let you do that, because you're going to interfere with the interference pattern. You're going to interfere with the trajectory of the photon or the electron by absorbing that electron out of that slit, and it won't interfere. And so I won't let you do that. And so you have to think that, you have to reason, you have to infer that the electron goes through, or photon goes through both slits simultaneously, and if you interfere the path of one of them, then there's going to be no interference pattern. So that's where they got all this. And so they say, we don't really know where the electron is, especially around the atom, in other words, around the nucleus. And the question is whether that's a question of science. who cares where the electron is? Please tell me what an electron is before you talk about its location. Please draw an electron, and you won't see a picture of the electron in the standard model. You'll see all these letters. You want to see the Higgs. It's a letter H. That's what Higgs looks like. And all the particles of, you want to see a graviton, it's a G, and so on. So all the particles of the standard model have letters of the alphabet because they've never seen one. They're all assumptions. They're all inferences. And so, yeah, the electron doesn't have a location. Well, what is an electron? Is it a little ball? Maybe that's why it doesn't have a location, because it's not a little ball. And they'll tell you it's not a little ball, but they continue ranting like if it were one. And they never pinpoint, they never draw it for you. Well, they draw it for you, but then they say, whatever you're looking at, that's not reality. That's not the actual atom, because the electron is spread out all over the atom, all around the atom simultaneously. It's in different positions at the same time. And yeah, it's like Feynman said, no one understands quantum mechanics because they have never rationalized it. Okay, so then Mr. Kaku says something else. He says something even worse. He says, he goes through the slit experiment, right? And then he says that, a particle can be at two places at once. He says, that's nonsense. That's preposterous. How can you be both dead and alive? Oh, no, this is, he goes into the cat. First, he went into the slit experiment, says particle can be at two places at once, and we don't know where the electrons are around the atom. Then he goes into the Schrodinger cat experiment, where he says you don't know the state of the cat until you open the box and take a peek. Observer has to see, measure, whatever. You have to look inside the box to see if the cat is dead or alive. But before you open the box, you don't know if the vial exploded and killed the cat or not. Maybe, the capsule is still there intact. Maybe it exploded. We don't know. And so since we don't have that information, we don't know if the cat is dead or alive. And so until you open the box, he says the cat is in both states. He's both dead and he's alive as well. And our act of seeing in there determines whether he's dead or alive. Now, does that intuitively sound like science to you? And I say it doesn't. This is not part of science. What are we talking about here? This is not only surrealistic, but it doesn't make any sense. It's irrational, totally irrational. But they say that quantum violates our intuition. Yeah, no kidding, And it says, so how can you be both dead and alive simultaneously? And nothing in this universe is certain until someone makes a measurement. In other words, you got to open the box, take a look, take a measurement, if you will, and only then will you know if it's dead or alive. That means the act of observation brings reality into reality, collapses the wave function. That's essentially what they're saying, which is an equation. And it collapses the wave function. Now you have the state in which you see it, the observer. Okay? So it's a tricky mental gymnastics. Okay, so what they conclude out of this in quantum is that consciousness determines existence. And again, Mr. Kaku there says, Eugene Wigner said, let's take it one step further. If I, a human being, looks at the cat, I am conscious. Therefore, consciousness determines existence or reality. In other words, the act of observing determines whether the cat's going to be alive or dead. Brings it into reality. Until then, there's no reality. All you have is a wave function. Okay, the cat is not a cat. He's a wave function. And everything inside the box is just a wave function. Okay, and the act of seeing turns the wave function into a cat. Together with whether he's alive or dead. I guess, something like that. It's very hard to understand what these people are referring to. But essentially says, consciousness determines reality. In other words, There is no independent reality out there. There is no table. There is no earth. There is no solar system out there. It's the act of seeing, of observing, of measuring that makes it come into reality. Kind of weird, isn't it? Because you would think that if I die at this very moment, this camera is still here, at least for you. And I guess you're not observing it. I just get out of the picture, I die, I fall down, and I'm dead. And does that mean that the camera's not here, independent of my observing? You would think that these people are cuckoo, okay? They're nuts. And what they're saying, it's totally irrational, it's easily debunked, but this is what science has become, mathematical physics. Okay, so nothing is real until someone measures it, and now we have, says, Einstein went ballistic and said, what you're saying, you're saying that the fact that you are a conscious being determines the fact that the cat is alive? And Michio answers the question, yes. That's exactly what he's saying. And he says, and Wigner, made one more step, and that is, how do I know that I'm alive? Now it gets interesting. Now it's going to get real interesting. We know that cat is alive because we peeked inside the box. But now, how do I know that I'm alive? These are the questions these people are asking. And it just blows my mind that a guy studies 10 years in a university and comes up with idiotic, because there's no other way to characterize this, with idiotic questions like, am I alive? Well, in science it's very easy. You just define the term alive. What does living mean? What is an entity that is alive? Once you define it, by definition, the entity, this thing, is alive or inert or dead, depending on the situation. Maybe it was alive, then it died. Maybe it's a rock, so it's inert. In quantum physics, they don't do it that way. They don't do it with definitions. They say you got to measure, you got to observe, you got to see, you got to look inside the box to see if it's alive. So you need the observer to determine whether a lion is alive. Because if the observer is not there, the lion may be dead for all you know. Or he's in both states. He's in a dead state and a live state simultaneously until you look and see him eating the zebra, right? And you say, oh yeah, now that I observe, it's alive. Well, when you did not observe, was he still eating the zebra? I mean, maybe he killed the zebra first and was eating it. And when you peeked, he was at that moment in time eating the zebra. But there were some steps before that you didn't see in the movie because you were not observing, which is how the lion killed the zebra and got it down and started eating it. And those early steps, weren't they there? Wasn't that part of the film strip, the movie, there already before you started observing? And if the lion, had to run and kill the zebra and bring it down and start eating it, obviously, I think by definition, the lion was alive. So, again, you got to keep all these things in mind. The state of mind of these people. These are the people who run physics, mathematical physics, science today. And they're all mystics, they're all spiritualists. Look at what they're saying. Look at the questions they're asking. And he says, you see, the cat and me were part of the same universe. If I don't know the cat is alive or dead, I could also be dead at the same time and not even know it. This is what Michio Kaku says. He could be dead, or I think he's dead, mentally dead for sure. But he says he could be in both states. He could be dead or alive, but he doesn't know whether he's dead or alive, as he's going to say in the next one, in the next thing here that I'm going to put up, until someone observes. So he needs someone to tell him, look, now that I observe you, I think you're alive. Oh, thank God. Thank God I'm alive because someone observed me. Because maybe if you don't observe him, who knows, maybe he's dead. You figure it out. This is beyond my intelligence. Okay, so he says, he goes on to extrapolate here, Michio. He says that there is he concludes, he surmises from all this that there is a cosmic consciousness. What is he referring to? I'll let you guess. So who determines that I'm alive? Okay, and he says, well, Wigner's friend looks at me, I look at the cat, and we exist. But then who looks at Wigner's friend? And there is an infinite chain of people looking at people, until finally you hit cosmic consciousness. Someone that looks at all of us. Does that ring a bell? If this is quantum mechanics, if this comes from a personality, a celebrity of mathematical physics such as Michio Kaku, which is everywhere. He's being interviewed for documentaries, etc., by the tons. And this is what this guy is saying. This is what he learned in college. This is what he's ended up believing. He says there's a cosmic consciousness that looks at all of us. Because if that cosmic consciousness did not look at all of us, we may not exist, or we may all be dead. And thank God that the cosmic consciousness looks at us and, we're in this other state, which is the alive state or the living state. Okay? Listen what he's saying. And he adds that nothing happens without an observer. He says, some consciousness that is ethereal, that envelopes the universe. Now he's defining more precisely what he's talking about, which looks at us and says, aha, the cat is alive. Wigner believed that consciousness is an inextricable part of reality. Nothing really happens in the physical world unless a conscious mind observes it. So he's reinforcing that in order for something to happen, in order for something to exist, it must be observed. Something, someone, whatever, has to observe it. And it's got to be conscious. It can't be a chair observing you. It can't be a plant, which is a little more alive than a chair or a rock. It can't be a plant observing you. It's got to be something with consciousness, unless you believe, maybe that's the next quantum level, that plants have consciousness. But let's not put words in their mouth. It's got to be a conscious being that observes in order for something to exist, to be alive or dead, or to determine, or through measurement, whether the thing exists or is alive or dead. There's got to be some cosmic consciousness, okay? And that's what Wigner concluded from the quantum interpretations, and that's what Mr. Michio Kaku believes. Guy who studied 10 years at the university, got a PhD. He's a celebrity of physics or mathematical physics. He's interviewed by all the documentaries. And he writes papers, and he's very influential. And this guy is saying that there is a cosmic consciousness, and he gets this idea, he gets this notion from quantum. Because in quantum, you need to have an observer for something to happen. Otherwise, you don't know whether the cat is alive or dead, or whether he even exists. Okay, so let's go to the next step. And so he ends, Mrs. Sabrine, she uses all this information from this celebrity, the authority, and she just brings it in because that's how she studied in school, in college. You might say that I'm too much of a cynic, too much gone in my mind, if I say what I'm going to say next, and that's that college has become a monastery. It's a church. You go there to be brainwashed. And you might say, Bill, you're out of your mind. Come on, are you saying that all universities on the planet, all people who teach physics in the physics department at every university, that they're out of their mind, they're all spiritualists, they're all religious people, they're all mystics? Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. And why am I saying that? Because one generation after another just learns what the previous generation taught them, right? And so this guy goes out there, goes to college. He's a freshman, he's a sophomore, an entry level guy, and he might have his own ideas, his intuitive ideas of how this universe runs, even at the particle or at the cosmic level. And so some of these people might challenge their instructors, their professors. Most of them don't. Maybe most of them just absorb, study for the test, take the test, pass it in, and you've got a degree. Fine. But some people say, I have doubts about this. Well, when you're a sophomore or a freshman, you come in there and you say, well, this doesn't sound right to me. I want to challenge this. And the professor has more arguments. He's been around a little more. He's older usually than his students. And he's heard a lot of arguments. So he can kill your arguments if you're kind of new and you thought you knew what you were talking about, and suddenly they shock you and they say, look, this is what's wrong with your argument. And this is what we've proven. And this is what these guys in the lab have shown. And it's been verified by this guy on the other side of the planet. And so it's kind of, takes you off guard. And you say, Jesus, and I don't want people laughing at me, and I don't want to ruin my career. So you fall in. You fall in and you say, well, yeah, I guess that does make sense. And little by little, they convince you of idiocy. And they convince you of idiocy such as, that the observer determines reality. That there is no independent reality. That this table is not here if I don't observe it. That I need to observe it. And hopefully all of you observe it. Because otherwise I'm worried that if I die right now, the table might disappear together with me. Or maybe it's alive or dead. I don't know. Maybe the table's alive as well. I don't know. And what does this girl say, this lady here? She says, again, she's a Muslim. You can see by her headdress. And I caught her in a praying mode, I guess. The observer effect of quantum mechanics happens when observation changes the nature of a quantum particle from a probability wave, which is an unreal thing, to a real thing. So all we have out there are probability waves until you open your eyes. Every morning, when you sleep at night, everything's a probability wave. But when you open your eyes in the morning, everything collapses into what reality. There was no table, there was only a probability wave. And now that you open your eyes, the table kind of self-assembles real quick. Zip, in zero time. The chair that you're going to sit on suddenly, materializes, I guess. And hopefully you observe the table, the chair before you sit on it, because maybe if you don't observe it, the chair's not there and you fall on your butt. I don't know what these people have going through their minds, but this is what she's saying, that everything's a probability wave until we observe it. And the question is, if you close your eyes and I open mine, what does that indicate? Does that mean that the table is there for me and not for you because you closed your eyes? Well, yeah, of course. If I close my eyes, I don't see anything. A blind man doesn't see anything. So I guess for a blind man, nothing exists. You interpret this. It's beyond my capability, believe me. So let's go with the next one. She says that the observer effect was already predicted in the Quran. Okay, so we have this, you need observation for reality to come into being, for the wave to collapse. And she says, we've known this for 1,500 years. The Quran says this. She says the observer effect of quantum mechanics was already predicted, famous word of mathematical physics, predicted by the Quran 1.5 millennium ago. Okay? Life is also made up of atoms, so does life also behave in this controversial manner? In other words, first she says, look, the Quran already said that reality has some paragraph there, some verse that says reality is a function of observation. And now she says, well, how about life? What should we think about life? Is life also subject to this observer effect because, after all, we're made out of atoms. We're made out of atoms, and atoms only acquire reality when we observe them or observe the totality of them, like you observe all of me. Then, what are we saying? We're saying that I come into being because of your observation. The Quran already said that thousands of years ago. But then does that observer effect apply to living entities as well? Me, my existence, whether I'm alive or dead. And because, Schrodinger did it with a cat, and everybody said, well, as long as it's the cat, it's okay. But now I'll put you in the box with a little capsule, poisonous capsule, and we'll find out if you're alive or dead. Well, I'm outside the box. I haven't seen whether you're alive or dead, but hopefully you are in there without anyone observing you, and you should know, you should reason whether you're alive or dead, I hope. But if you need for someone to observe you for you to determine or reach the conclusion whether you are alive or dead, oh my God, then we really have a serious problem. And I think we should take you to a psychologist, psychiatrist, right? Okay, so what does she say? And here it's interesting because she twists a verse of the Quran. And I want you to see that because I copied the verse, okay? She says the following. She quotes the Quran, and she says the following. In the future, this is what the Quran says. This is what Allah says, okay? We will show them, the atheists, the Christians, whoever, non-Islamic people. We will show them our signs in the universe and within their own selves, their consciousness or their physiology, until it will become clear to them that He is the truth, the real, and then she mentions some Arab word, the real whatever. Okay. I looked it up, and the Fusilat 4153, which is the one that says that, says something a little different. She added some words there on her own that, and what caught my eye was the word physiology. I'm sure that 1,500 years ago, Mohammed or whoever had no idea what physiology was. These people were quite ignorant people. And so when you talk about physiology and consciousness, I'm saying these are modern words. And effectively, if you look at the verse, it says something a little different. It says, we will show them our signs in the universe and in their own selves until it becomes manifest to them that this, the Quran, is the truth, not God. But she says that He is the truth. She's referring to God, so she misinterpreted her own Quran. Or at least she's got a difference with other people in Islam. Some people in Islam say what the verse is saying is that the Quran is real, is the truth, whereas she's saying that He, God, Allah, is the truth. So there's a difference there. And then she added those other words which have nothing to do with the Quran, which are consciousness and physiology. She needed to enter the word consciousness because that's her argument, that consciousness, according to quantum, determines reality. And since it's not in the Quran, she had to put it in there. Again, modern revisionist. By the way, Bible people do exactly the same thing. So this is not an issue of Islam. It's an issue of religious people, of traditional religions, who are revising their interpretation, okay? Let's see here. Not sure if the image froze here, but let me see if I get it restarted just in case. Okay. So where was I? So these people are revising the old texts. Just making sure that you folks are seeing me. I don't see any movement over there in the image that I have on the side. Now I see some movement. Okay, sorry about that. Anyways, these people are revising the old text. They're putting words in there, and everybody's doing that because they want to show that what quantum, mathematical physics in general, even general relativity, because you're talking about the origin of the universe, Big Bang, they put God in there, and so on. So all these people, traditional religions, from traditional religions, are trying to show that science is only doing what they wanted all along. That science is proving God through quantum and through general relativity, through mathematical physics in general. And here we're dealing with quantum mechanics, and again, this lady is saying that the Quran already predicted quantum mechanics, the observer effect, okay, that you need an observer. And I'm sure you know where she's going with all this. You already feel it because Michio Kaku already mentioned that there's a cosmic cosmic observer, okay? And she's kind of going in the same direction. So what does she say? She says, nothing other than quantum mechanics. You need to bring science into this, right? So quantum mechanics is science. We need to bring that in there to prove the Quran or prove that Quran is correct. Nothing other than quantum mechanics fits this description, especially because the central theme of quantum mechanics is that the world around us, including us, is not physically objectively real. We're not real. Objectively, right? The consequence of these new developments in cosmology and physiology, again, she introduces physiology, would be to necessarily conclude, the existence of an all-observant, intelligent being. She takes that extra step there and says, we need an observant, intelligent, it's got to be intelligent, can't be just conscious, got to be intelligent being, okay? And again, if, like Michio Kaku said a minute ago, if I need to observe the cat and someone needs to observe me for me to exist, and someone needs to observe whoever observed me, someone's got to be observing all of us. And the question that popped in my mind for you to ponder as well is, do we have to observe God for God to exist? Because if we don't observe that God exists, does God exist? Is he alive or dead? I mean, who's observing him? And again, the buck stops here. They always put God and say he's the guy that observes everything else, but then they don't mention who needs to observe him. It's the same issue as, we've had for hundreds of years now. People have argued, said, well, who made God? We get to God made this, who made that, and God made everything, and then the question is, who made God? Well, God has no maker, he's eternal. And this is more or less the same argument from a different point of view, from a different perspective, saying, well, I need to observe you, you need to observe the cat, and so on. We all need to observe for each other to exist, but then who observes God? If God is the guy who observes everything in order for the universe to exist or to be alive or whatever. And again, if we don't observe God because we can't see him, does God exist? So that's a good argument that you can take with you. And Allah, she concludes, it's Allah, but God, it's God in a different language and different religion. The only objective reality. How she concluded that, I don't know, but she took that extra step and she jumped up there and she just says, God is the intelligent being that we're talking about, the observer. Everything else is not objectively real. Okay, so we're not real. Even though if I look at you and determine that you're real now for me, and you're not dead because I observe you as alive and I tell you, look, you're alive, okay? Even with all that going for you, she says that nothing, neither you nor I, we're not real anyways, unless God observes us. And let's just hope and pray to Allah or whoever that God doesn't go to sleep. I mean, God closes his eyes. Well, you know what's going to happen to you. And she recommends the following to students of science. Now remember, she's a mechanical engineer. She says, this is what she wants people to take to get out of her presentation. The most important point to understand by any serious student of science is that the observer effect is not just an anomaly or a counterintuitive mishap that happened in one experiment. The observer effect is a meta phenomenon. It is a fundamental quality of the quantum world that make the universe sensitive to conscious observation. In other words, she's mixing religion with science and saying that science proves religion, specifically quantum mechanics proves Islam because it reinforces the Quran. And she's saying that you need consciousness, you need an observer for things to be real. Otherwise, they're not real. There's no objective reality out there. There's only a subjective one dependent on the observer. And the maximum or the ultimate observer is the man upstairs. Okay? And this lady studied at the university, okay? Where she got all this nonsense, I don't know. But this is what these people are saying. And Michio Kaku also studied at the university. He's got 10 years. I don't think he's a Buddhist, or I don't think he's a Muslim. I don't know. Maybe he considers himself an atheist. I don't even know what he thinks of himself as far as that. I haven't looked that up. But obviously he's some kind of mystic. He's a spiritualist, as I call him. There's materialists and spiritualists. And a spiritualist is 90% of humanity. Most people believe that there is some energy out there. They call it energy. They call it cosmic observer, whatever you want to, there are different designations, but they all mean the same thing. There's something out there, and that unknown, that dark matter that governs us, that looks over us, that's what people believe. And they believe that, a lot of things we don't understand, we fill that vacuum with spirits, with supernatural stuff, with irrational explanations. All of quantum is like that, okay? And so she clarifies that the most, she says, she added there, when we, where is it? Sorry. She says, the quantum world is not only affected by our observation. The quantum world does not have any physical existence. Talking about particles here, right? Subatomic particles and atoms and so on. Doesn't have any physical existence. It does not exist in our three-dimensional universe. It is our conscious observation that makes it real. Something that occupies space has properties. Until then, it is just a wave of probabilities. Okay, so she's confirming what quantum is saying here, okay, nothing more. And not a wave of energy, whatever she means by energy, because or matter, she says. So we have the wave of probabilities, wave of energy. I thought they were the same thing, but obviously she says they're different, and it's not a wave of matter. What we have is a mathematical wave. That's what we have. There's a mathematical wave vibrating out there, right? Or a collection of all possibilities that the particle has, all the states that it could be in, all the position, all locations that it could be in. I guess the particle covers the entire universe. The particle is everywhere. And that solves the problem, because whenever you need it over here, you got it there, right? So, when you have the particle having multiple, infinite locations, as they say, then there's no problem. You can explain anything with that, right? And so she says a mathematical wave, or a collection of all possibilities that the particle has. And when we observe it, it takes up one or the other of its possibilities. Okay, so this is quantum, and she's going to move on and say that, the Quran already beat quantum by 1,000 years. So if the universe at its core has no physical reality, and it is our conscious observation that makes it real, then what is the necessary conclusion that we're left with? Okay, so now you got to think. You got to say, well, okay, if we follow her train of thought, if we need an observer, then what is the logical conclusion, right? And yes, you guessed. It is that the conscious observation, or consciousness, is the most fundamental thing in the universe, to the universe. It's not matter. It's not space or time. So now she gets rid of general relativity completely. All are emergent. The most fundamental thing in the universe is consciousness. And obviously, if we talk about consciousness and we're talking about universe, we got back to where Mr. Kaku took us. He says there's a cosmic consciousness, okay? And so how does he see this? He says, well, she's got one step here. Says, we occupy an insignificant portion of the vast expanding universe. Brings back general relativity. We have an expanding universe. We have to understand that when we look around the world, we see a real 3D physical universe. We don't see any fuzzy wave of probability. And there, I totally agree with her. We don't see waves of probability. And so I see a chair. I don't see a wave of probability. I see a table. I don't see a wave of probability. And she says, that's our 3D world. But what I've done with my eyesight, my magical eyesight, is convert the wave into the table or give it some reality. I ask you, what is this consciousness that is present everywhere in the universe? And, it's a cliffhanger. I cannot imagine what it could be, okay? And yes, here's the final nail on this thing. The beginning of the universe, there was a beginning, is actually a quantum event, okay? The universe as a whole has a universal wave function. But when we look around, we don't see the wave function. We see a real 3D universe. Why? Because there is someone observing the entire universe from the beginning to the end. This is the absolute consciousness. Here is science itself proving the existence of a conscious, intelligent being. Little jump there on her logic. Who is ever present and ever observant of each and everything that is happening in the entire universe. Breathtaking. Well, we have a problem first with the word proof, as I said at the beginning. In science, we don't prove. Prove means I convinced you of something, especially of a theory. So how do I prove my theory? Well, I do an experiment, or I do it logically and show you that there is no other outcome from my logical train of thought. And you become convinced of what I said. And now you believe in it, and it's been proven to you. Okay? And in mathematics, they use the word proof a lot. And this comes from the days of the Greeks. The Greeks used to say, they had a theorem and they wanted to prove something, usually related to geometry. Okay? So the guy would put a theorem there, would draw a little picture of a triangle or a square, a circle, whatever he wanted to prove, and he proved some angle or some feature of that triangle, of parts of it, of angles and so on. And when he showed that there was a relation, he called that a proof. And that's how the word proof got into mathematics. And, it's got more than 2,000 years of history. So, the word proof is ingrained in the minds of the mathematicians. When you go to college, they talk about proof and proving. And it never dawned on them that you really don't prove, not a theory, but we got to separate, mathematics can only describe. Mathematics is only a description. When you see an equation, it's a description of something. In 120% of the cases, it's a description of movement, okay? It's telling you how something behaves. That's all that an equation does. And mathematics is just that. It's just a description. Mathematics cannot explain to you a cause. That's why mathematical physics today has no explanation, no physical interpretation, no rational physical interpretations for phenomena, invisible phenomena. It can do things that are visible, but not for the invisible one, not for light, not for magnetism, not for gravity, these kinds of things, phenomena. Mathematical physics has no explanation. Why? Because math has no power to explain. Math can only describe. The physical interpretation comes out of the top of the mathematician's mind. And if he models it with particles or waves, for sure he's going to get it wrong. He's going to get it not wrong. He's going to get it irrational. He's going to get it supernatural. He's going to get it surrealistic. And so we don't prove theories. You can prove a description maybe. You can use the word proof in the context of a description. Say, look, I've proven that the circumference is 3.14 times the diameter, okay, of any circle. And you can say, I prove that, okay? It's a fact, not a proof. But if you want to use the word proof in that context and say that description that you just made is a proof, or that, for example, that all circles meet that condition, fine, you call it a proof. But you can't introduce the word proof when you talk about theories. Theory is just an explanation, and an explanation is just you're essentially telling us a mechanism, how something happened, what the cause of that thing was. And all you're giving is, you can say an opinion, but it's not an opinion. You're explaining objectively. You're saying this is how a car runs. The gas enters here, goes to the spark plugs, etc., and they make the axle turn eventually, and you get the wheels moving. You're just explaining objectively so that the other person understands. And once you've done that, the other person has the option of believing or not believing in your theory. For all we know, the guy says, no, that's not how a car runs. God sends his angels and they move the wheels. Maybe that's what you believe in. That's what's proven to you. That's your proof. So we don't prove theories. Everyone believes the theory he wants. All we can do is explain theories objectively so that people understand it. Whether they believe your theory or not is a separate issue that involves religion. It's in religion where we prove, where we believe. In science, we only explain rationally so that people understand. Okay? So the word prove, we wipe it out from her mouth immediately. It has no validity in science. The other one is that we don't prove through an experiment. Experiments have to do with technology. Now, if you run an experiment in your basement because you have doubts about something, or you want to find the cause of something, you want to observe a phenomena again to see if you can figure out what causes it, what the mechanism is, that's fine. Go ahead and run all the experiments you want. But the experiment does not prove the theory. The theory that you, especially on an invisible entity, phenomenon such as gravity and so on, it doesn't prove your theory. The theory that you're going to come up with is just an explanation for how that experiment was run. It doesn't mean that you've proven it. You prove just means that if I say that you proved it, all I'm saying is that you convinced me that your explanation is the correct one. But that's my opinion. Another person might have a different, opinion or different explanation for that same mechanism. In fact, we do, in the case of gravity, Einstein said warp space. Quantum mechanics says, negative momentum transfer. The force of the graviton delivers negative momentum, pull. Rope hypothesis says, you've got many ropes, and as you approach another object, you have acceleration because new ropes tug or act individually, separately. When they're at a distance, they all act as a single coaxial. When they're close by, they fan out and they act independently. So we have three different mechanisms, three different explanations for gravity. Did I prove to you my explanation over the one from general relativity, mathematical physics? Did I prove mine over the one presented by quantum mechanics? No, you believe one, this other guy believes the other one, and I believe this other one. So what's been proven? For me, there is no proof, or my belief is this. For you, it's another one. And so we don't prove in science, and we certainly don't do it through an experiment. If I drop a pen, let's see, I got a pen here. If I drop a pen, right, and I'll let it go, okay, it falls, unless there's something else acting upon it, it tends to fall always to the floor. And after many experiments, we've shown that, or experience tells us, that it falls apparently towards the center of the earth. Now, we don't see the invisible mechanism Mother Nature uses to produce that effect. So one guy says warp space, the other guy says negative momentum transfer, and I say, ropes. Did any of us prove that mechanism that they're proposing? No. It's whichever one you believe is proof to you, but not to the other guy. So the experiment doesn't prove a theory. We don't prove theories in science. Proof just means you became convinced of something. And what this lady does here in her dissertation is bring quantum mechanics and say, look, quantum has already proven that we need an observer for the particle to have reality, or for the cat to be alive or dead. We need the observer. And now that she, puts that stake in the air, she hangs on to that and tries to hammer another one higher up. So she's already hung one in the air. She's hanging on to nothing. And she steps on that one. Now she hangs another one up in the air. She says, now that we've proven that quantum has proven, that you need an observer, now I can extrapolate that and say, well, then if we need an observer for reality, for the reality of quantum, then we need an observer for the universe, because the entire universe is made out of atoms. And so this is her logic, and that's how she proves, that quantum proves the existence of God. And then she goes to the good book, Quran, and says, look, it's already been said that, you need a cosmic observer. And here, she kind of extrapolates from a verse that it's already been said in the Quran. Just one little verse. And the verse is very vague. Let's see if I can get it back up here. The verse says, in the future we will show them our signs in the universe and within their own selves, and I'll skip the part of consciousness, until it will become clear to them that He is the truth. How that relates to quantum, I don't know, but that's how she interpreted it. And she put a few words in there to help her case, the word consciousness, because she needed that to show that there is a cosmic consciousness, something that Mr. Mohammed, 1,500 years ago, didn't even think about. So again, some of these proofs, so-called proofs, you got to be careful. They're all over the internet. It's not only Islam. I've seen it also with biblical scholars, and they're all out there trying to prove to you that God exists, and it's been proven by mathematical physics. In the realm of general relativity, it's proven by the origin of the universe, that if there was an origin, all you need to do is put God on the other side with a magic wand, and he got it all started. Whereas a guy like Stephen Hawking believed that there was no God on the other side, that the universe just sprang from energy. These people say, well, you're just trying to avoid the question, but what you're really saying, there is a God out there that created the universe. And in the realm of quantum, they're saying you need an observer, because otherwise the particle doesn't exist, or the cat is not alive or dead until you observe it. The wave function turns into a particle or a cat, table, whatever, and so you need to observe it. And who observes all of us? God. And again, one of the questions you should keep in mind for all these people is, if you don't observe God, I think that defeats their argument. If you don't observe God, does he exist? Or is he a wave function, meanwhile? Okay, that's it for today. Any questions? Please put them in the Patreon blog, okay? And tomorrow we'll see you again. I've got another interesting topic that I will be covering, and hopefully my son will be here with me. I think that I might need him, maybe not, maybe I'll fire him, but he's the boss, so you can't fire your boss so easily. We'll see you tomorrow.